An orphaned teen donated her only coat to a freezing old man, unaware he was Santa in disguise. The moment Ellie's threadbare jacket left her trembling fingers, she felt both the bitter December wind slice through her thin sweater and an unexpected warmth bloom somewhere beneath her ribs. Strange how giving away the only thing keeping you from freezing could somehow make you feel warmer. The old man's roomy eyes had widened when she'd draped the patched coat around his hunched shoulders. His weathered face, half hidden beneath a matted white beard, creased with bewilderment. "I can't take this, child," he'd protested, his voice like rustling leaves. "You need it more than I do." But Ellie had simply shrugged, tucking her chapped hands into her armpits, pretending the cold wasn't already seeping into her bones. "I've got another at home," she lied, backing away before he could argue further, before he could see the truth in her eyes. She didn't have another coat. She didn't have much of anything anymore. The snow whipped around her as she trudged down 5th Street, shoulders hunched against the cold that bit through her thin sweater. The street lamps flickered to life, casting weak golden pools across the darkening sidewalk. Holiday decorations twinkled in shop windows, reminders of warmth and family and belonging she no longer had. 3 months, 17 days since the fire. Since she'd become that girl, the one whispered about in the hallways at school, the one teachers gave pitying looks, the one who bounced between foster homes because nobody quite knew what to do with a 17-year-old who rarely spoke anymore. Ellie flexed her fingers, trying to keep the blood flowing. The wind sliced through her like she was made of paper. Without her coat, the 15-minute walk to Mrs. Henley's house felt like a trek across Antarctica. But the image of the old man, huddled against the wall outside the convenience store, his thin body shaking violently in clothes too worn to keep out the December freeze, it had awakened something in her. Something she thought had died in the fire along with her parents. The feeling was almost foreign now. Compassion. Caring about something beyond her own grief. "Stupid," she muttered, the word hanging in a cloud of vapor before dissipating into the night. Maybe Mrs. Henley would have a spare blanket she could use as a coat tomorrow. Or maybe she wouldn't notice if Ellie borrowed one of the coats from the hall closet that nobody ever seemed to wear. By the time Ellie reached the modest brick house where she'd been staying for the past 3 weeks, her whole body was shaking uncontrollably. Her fingertips had gone from red to white to an alarming shade of blue. The porch light was on, a dim beacon in the gathering darkness, but no welcoming warmth spilled from under the door. Mrs. Henley would be working late again. The house would be empty, cold until the heating timer kicked in at 6. Ellie fumbled with the key, her numb fingers struggling to fit it into the lock. When she finally managed to open the door, the silent hallway greeted her with indifference. Just like every other place she'd stayed since the fire. Just somewhere to exist, never a home. She flicked on the lights and headed straight for the kitchen, turning the tap to its hottest setting and holding her hands under the stream until feeling returned in painful, prickling waves. Her reflection in the window above the sink looked like a stranger, hollow-cheeked, dark circles under eyes that had forgotten how to light up, hair that had once been her pride, thick and golden, now hung limp and dull around her face. Her mother would have been horrified. The thought sent a fresh wave of grief crashing through her. Mom, with her endless supply of hair products and home remedies. Dad, who always complimented her no matter how she looked. Gone. Everything gone in one terrible night of smoke and sirens and screaming. Ellie turned away from her reflection, unable to bear it any longer. In the silent house, she moved through the rituals of existence, homework spread across the kitchen table, a sandwich made from whatever she could find in the refrigerator, a shower hot enough to temporarily chase away the cold that seemed permanently embedded in her bones. Later, curled beneath 3 blankets in the small bedroom that felt like a hotel room rather than a place she belonged, Ellie stared at the ceiling. She couldn't stop thinking about the old man. Had her coat been enough? Where would he sleep tonight? The temperature was supposed to drop below freezing. Something about him had seemed different. Not just another homeless person on the streets of Burlington. There had been a clarity in his eyes, a dignity in the way he'd held himself despite his ragged appearance. And when he'd thanked her, there'd been a moment, brief but undeniable, when she'd felt something pass between them. Recognition, maybe. 2 lost souls alone in the cold. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of fire and ice, of running through snowy forests, of a workshop filled with light and sound, and strangely, of sleigh bells ringing in the distance. Morning arrived with surprising brilliance. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, reflecting off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Ellie blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the brightness. Something was different. She sat up slowly, scanning the unfamiliar bedroom that had been hers for less than a month. Everything looked the same. The second-hand dresser, the desk with its neat stack of schoolbooks, the bare walls she hadn't bothered to decorate. But there, draped over the chair by the window, a coat. Not her old coat, the one she'd given away. This was something else entirely. Ellie slid out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cold floor as she approached it. The coat was deep burgundy, made of some material that seemed to shimmer slightly in the morning light. It looked expensive, brand new, and exactly her size. Her fingers trembled as she reached out to touch it. The material was softer than anything she'd ever felt, yet somehow she knew it would be warmer than her old coat had ever been. "Mrs. Henley?" Ellie called out, her voice breaking the silence. No answer. She was probably already at work, but even if she had been home, Ellie knew the older woman would never have left something like this without saying anything. Besides, on a social worker's salary, Mrs. Henley could barely afford to keep the heat running, let alone buy luxury coats for temporary foster kids. Taped to the coat was a small envelope. Ellie's name was written across it in elaborate, swirling script that reminded her of old-fashioned penmanship, the kind nobody used anymore. Inside was a note, written on thick cream-colored paper that smelled faintly of peppermint and pine. "Kindness given freely is never truly lost. Warmth returns to the warm-hearted. N*N?" Ellie turned the note over, but there was nothing else. No explanation for how the coat had appeared in her locked bedroom overnight. No clue as to who had left it. A prickle of unease ran down her spine. She should be afraid, shouldn't she? Someone had been in her room while she slept. But instead of fear, all she felt was a strange, tingling curiosity. And something else. A sensation she'd almost forgotten. Wonder. The coat fit perfectly when she slipped it on, settling around her shoulders like it had been made specifically for her. Which was impossible, of course. And yet, school that day passed in a blur. Several people commented on her new coat, but Ellie deflected with vague responses. How could she explain something she didn't understand herself? Mrs. Henley noticed it that evening, but seemed to assume it was a donation from the school's winter clothing drive, which Ellie didn't correct. That night, Ellie slept deeply for the first time in months, wrapped in dreams of snowflakes that whispered secrets and stars that seemed close enough to touch. She woke to find a small wooden box on her nightstand that hadn't been there the night before. This time there was no note. Just the box, intricately carved with patterns of snowflakes and pine trees. Ellie's hands shook as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of red velvet, was a snow globe. Not the cheap tourist kind, but an exquisite, handcrafted piece of art. Inside the glass dome was a perfect miniature replica of the old Victorian house she'd grown up in, the one that had burned down 3 months ago. Tears blurred her vision as she gently lifted it out. When she turned the key at its base, tiny lights illuminated the windows, and a soft melody played, her mother's favorite Christmas carol. Ellie clutched the snow globe to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Who could have known? Who could have possibly created this perfect replica of her lost home? The old man's face flashed in her mind, those knowing eyes, the gentle way he'd looked at her when she'd given him her coat. But that was ridiculous. He was just a homeless man she'd helped on impulse, wasn't he? 3 nights later, Ellie found a small, leather-bound journal beside her bed. The pages were blank except for the first one, which bore a single line in that same elegant handwriting. Sometimes, to find our way forward, we must first write our own ending to the past. That night, Ellie wrote for the first time since the fire. Words poured out of her, rage and grief and guilt, and a desperate longing for the life she'd lost. She wrote until her hand cramped and tears stained the pages, until the first pale light of dawn crept through her window. She fell asleep with the journal clutched to her chest and woke hours later feeling lighter than she had in months. Not healed, the wound was too deep for that, but as if someone had finally acknowledged her pain, given her permission to feel it without drowning in it. The gifts continued to appear, always while she slept, always somehow knowing exactly what she needed most. A framed photograph she thought had been lost in the fire, a hand-knitted scarf in her favorite shade of blue, a small wooden music box that played the lullaby her father used to hum when she couldn't sleep. Each gift came with a note, sometimes cryptic, sometimes comforting, always signed with that solitary N. And with each gift, something inside Ellie began to thaw. She started noticing things again, the way sunlight caught in icicles hanging from the eaves, turning them into prisms, the rich aroma of Mrs. Henley's coffee in the morning, the kindness in her math teacher's eyes when he quietly extended assignment deadlines without her having to ask. One afternoon, 3 weeks after she'd given away her coat, Ellie found herself back on 5th Street. She hadn't planned to go there, had in fact been avoiding that route home, but her feet carried her past the convenience store where she'd first seen the old man. He wasn't there, of course. She hadn't really expected him to be. But as she stood on the spot where they'd met, snow crunching beneath her boots, something made her look up at the building across the street. The toy store had been there for as long as she could remember, though she'd never paid it much attention. Nicholas & Sons Fine Toys read the faded gold lettering on the window. It was one of those old-fashioned places that seemed to exist outside of time, selling handcrafted wooden trains and intricately dressed dolls rather than video games or plastic action figures. Something pulled her toward it, like an invisible thread tugging gently but insistently at her heart. A bell jingled softly as she pushed open the door, releasing a rush of warm air scented with cinnamon and wood polish. The shop was larger inside than it appeared from the street, with shelves stretching to the ceiling and narrow aisles winding between displays of toys that looked like they belonged in a museum rather than a store. No one seemed to be around, though soft classical music played from hidden speakers. Ellie wandered deeper into the shop, running her fingers along shelves of wooden animals carved with astonishing detail, cloth dolls with faces that seemed almost alive in their expressiveness. And then she saw it. A dollhouse that made her breath catch in her throat. It was an exact replica of her childhood home, down to the slightly crooked weather vane and the stained glass window in the attic that her mother had installed the summer before Ellie started high school. The same house that was captured in the snow globe beside her bed each night. Beautiful craftsmanship, isn't it? Ellie startled. A woman stood beside her, though Ellie hadn't heard her approach. She was perhaps in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. Yes, Ellie managed. It looks exactly like... She stopped herself. The woman smiled gently. Like what, dear? Like a house I used to know. Ellie finished, her voice barely above a whisper. Something flickered in the woman's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. My husband makes them all by hand. Each one unique. Your husband? Nicholas, the woman said, gesturing toward a framed photograph on the wall behind the counter. He's been making toys for, well, longer than most people would believe. Ellie moved closer to examine the photograph. It showed a man with a full white beard and bright eyes, standing in what appeared to be a workshop filled with tools and half-finished toys. He looked nothing like the ragged old man she'd given her coat to. This man was robust, healthy, dressed in a red sweater with suspenders over a crisp white shirt. And yet, something about the eyes. Is he here? Ellie asked, her heart suddenly pounding. Your husband? The woman's smile deepened, gentle creases forming around her mouth. Not at the moment, I'm afraid. He's making deliveries. When will he be back? Soon, the woman said. Very soon. He mentioned meeting a young lady recently who showed him exceptional kindness. He's been quite busy ever since. She tilted her head slightly, studying Ellie with those penetrating eyes. You wouldn't happen to be Eleanor James, would you? Ellie's stomach dropped. How do you know my name? Instead of answering, the woman reached beneath the counter and withdrew a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Nicholas asked me to give you this if you happened to stop by. Ellie's hands trembled as she accepted the package. It was heavier than it looked, and something inside shifted slightly when she moved it. Open it at home, the woman advised gently. Some gifts are best unwrapped in private. Before Ellie could respond, the bell above the door jingled again as a young family entered the shop. The woman gave Ellie one last smile before turning to greet the newcomers, leaving Ellie standing by the counter with the package clutched in her hands and 1,000 questions spinning through her mind. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, fat, lazy flakes that drifted like feathers from a cloud-heavy sky. Ellie tucked the package securely inside her beautiful burgundy coat and began the walk back to Mrs. Henley's house, her thoughts swirling as wildly as the snowflakes around her. Was it possible? The idea forming in her mind was impossible, childish, the kind of desperate fantasy she might have believed in before grief had forced her to grow up overnight. And yet, the coat that appeared in her room, the snow globe with her family home, the gifts that somehow knew exactly what she needed, what would help her heal. The note signed N. Nicholas. Ellie quickened her pace, suddenly desperate to be alone, to open the package burning against her side. Mrs. Henley was in the kitchen when Ellie burst through the front door, her cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. "There you are," the older woman exclaimed, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I was starting to worry. "Dinner's almost—" "I'm not hungry," Ellie interrupted, already halfway up the stairs. Sorry, I have homework. I'll eat later." She closed her bedroom door behind her with shaking hands, then sank down onto the edge of her bed. For a long moment she just stared at the package in her lap, afraid of what it might contain, afraid of what it might mean. Finally, she carefully unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a wooden box, similar to the one that had held the snow globe, but larger and more elaborately carved. This one featured intricate scenes that seemed to tell a story: children opening presents, a sleigh soaring across a starry sky, a workshop filled with industrious figures. Ellie lifted the lid slowly. Inside, nestled on red velvet, lay a leather-bound book. Not blank like the journal, but filled with printed text and colorful illustrations. The title, embossed in gold on the cover, read simply, "Believe," and beneath it, a handwritten note: "Eleanor, your coat kept an old man warm on the coldest night of the year, but your kindness warmed something far deeper. When you have so little, yet give what you have, that is the truest magic in this world. The fire took much from you, but it could not take your heart. That remains as beautiful and giving as ever, even in your darkest hour. Your parents would be proud of the young woman you've become. They loved you more than you can know, and that love remains with you always." This book contains stories of those who, like you, gave without expectation of return. Some are quite famous, though the tales of their generosity less so. Others lived quietly, their names forgotten by all but those whose lives they touched. Your story now joins theirs. Remember always, the greatest gifts are those we give, not those we receive. Though I hope the small tokens I've left bring you some measure of comfort. With deepest gratitude, Nicholas. P.S. There is one more gift waiting for you, but this one cannot be left beside your bed. Come to the shop on Christmas Eve after dark. Come alone. Ellie read the note 3 times, tears streaming silently down her face. Then she turned to the first page of the book. Hours passed as she read story after story, each beautifully illustrated, each telling of ordinary people whose simple acts of kindness had extraordinary consequences. Some she recognized, historical figures whose charitable acts weren't mentioned in school textbooks. Others were completely unknown, everyday heroes whose compassion had changed lives. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Mrs. Henley's soft knock, didn't notice her concerned face peering around the door. "Ellie? Are you all right? You've been up here for hours." Ellie looked up, startled. "I'm fine," she said, and was surprised to realize it was true. "Better than fine, actually." Mrs. Henley smiled, a real smile, not the careful professional one she usually wore. "You seem different tonight." Ellie considered this. "I think maybe I am," she said slowly. "I think maybe I'm starting to remember who I used to be." That night, Ellie dreamt of her parents, not of the fire that took them, as she had so many nights before, but of Christmas mornings from her childhood, of her mother's laughter as they baked cookies together, flour dusting both their noses, of her father teaching her to ice skate on the pond behind their house, his strong hands keeping her steady until she found her balance. She woke with tears on her pillow, but they weren't entirely tears of sadness. Christmas Eve arrived with a perfect blanket of fresh snow and a sky that promised more to come. All day, Ellie's stomach fluttered with a nervous excitement she hadn't felt in years. Mrs. Henley had invited her to attend midnight mass, but Ellie had politely declined. "I have somewhere else I need to be," she'd said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. As darkness fell, she slipped out of the house, the mysterious book tucked safely inside her burgundy coat. The streets were quiet, most people already gathered with family for Christmas Eve celebrations. Holiday lights twinkled from windows and trees, casting multicolored reflections on the fresh snow. When she reached Nicholas and Son's fine toys, the windows were dark. For a moment, Ellie's heart sank. Had she misunderstood? But when she tried the door, it opened silently, the bell above it conspicuously silent. Inside, the shop was transformed. Dozens of candles illuminated the space, their warm glow turning the toys into mysterious silhouettes. The music was different too, not the classical pieces she'd heard before, but something older, stranger, like a lullaby sung in a language she almost recognized. "Hello?" Ellie called softly. "Mrs. Nicholas?" She realized she didn't know the woman's name. "She's Martha," came a deep, rumbling voice from the shadows at the back of the shop. "And she's waiting in the workshop. But I wanted to speak with you first, Eleanor." A figure stepped forward into the circle of candlelight. The old man she'd given her coat to, but not as she remembered him. Gone were the ragged clothes and matted beard. He stood tall and straight, dressed in a rich red suit with gleaming black boots. His beard was neatly trimmed, his face ruddy with health. But the eyes, those were the same, ancient and kind and somehow knowing. "It was you," Ellie whispered. "All along." He smiled, and the room seemed to grow warmer. "It has always been me, in one form or another. Though few see me as clearly as you did that night. But," Ellie's mind raced through 1,000 questions. "Why were you like that? Why were you freezing on the street when you have all this?" She gestured around at the magical toy shop. The man, Nicholas, stepped closer, his eyes twinkling in the candlelight. "I go out into the world each year, in many guises, to see with my own eyes who is truly kind. Not those who give when it costs them nothing, but those who give when they can least afford to. Those who, like you, will sacrifice their own comfort for a stranger." He reached out, gently touching the sleeve of the burgundy coat. "You gave me your only protection against the cold that night. You lied to spare my pride, claiming you had another at home. You walked away shivering, yet I saw something in your face that looked almost like peace." Ellie swallowed hard, remembering that strange, unexpected warmth she'd felt, even as the cold bit into her skin. "I thought I was just doing what anyone would do." Nicholas shook his head, his smile sad now. "No, child. What you did is remarkably rare, especially from one who has lost so much. Most people in your position would turn inward, focusing only on their own pain." "I was," Ellie admitted. "For months after the fire, I didn't care about anyone or anything. I was just surviving. Yet when the moment came, your true nature prevailed." He gestured toward a door at the back of the shop that Ellie hadn't noticed before. "Come. There's someone waiting to meet you." Curious and slightly apprehensive, Ellie followed Nicholas through the door and down a short hallway. Another door opened into what should have been, based on the building's exterior, a small storeroom. Instead, Ellie found herself in an enormous workshop that couldn't possibly fit within the confines of the toy store. Workbenches stretched as far as she could see, each one attended by— Ellie blinked, certain her eyes were playing tricks on her. The workers were small, not children, but not quite adults either. They moved with incredible dexterity, crafting toys with astonishing skill and speed. None seemed to notice Ellie and Nicholas's entrance, so absorbed were they in their tasks. "Are they—" Ellie couldn't bring herself to say it, feeling foolish even as the question formed. Nicholas chuckled, the sound like distant sleigh bells. "My helpers take many forms. This is how they appear to those with eyes to see them." At the center of the workshop stood Martha, the silver-haired woman from the toy shop. She was bent over a table with another figure, taller than the other workers, with her back to Ellie. "We have a visitor," Nicholas called out. The figure turned, and Ellie's world stopped. Her mother stood before her, looking exactly as she had the day before the fire. Her golden hair twisted into the messy bun she always wore when working on her art projects, her green eyes bright with life and love, a smudge of paint on her cheek. "Mom?" Ellie whispered, her voice breaking on the word. Her mother's smile was exactly as Ellie remembered, slightly crooked with a dimple in her right cheek. "Hello, my brave girl." Ellie looked wildly at Nicholas, unable to form words, unable to understand what was happening. Was this a cruel trick? A dream? Had she finally lost her mind completely? "It's really her," Nicholas said gently. "For tonight only. My Christmas gift to you both." "How?" Ellie managed, her whole body trembling. "There are more things in heaven and earth, Eleanor, than are dreamt of in your philosophy," Nicholas said. "I cannot bring back the dead permanently. No one can. But on this night, when the veil between worlds grows thin, certain exceptions can be made." Ellie took a hesitant step forward, then another. Her mother held out her arms, and with a sob, Ellie flung herself into the embrace she'd thought she'd never feel again. Her mother felt solid, real, warm. She smelled of paint and jasmine perfume and that indefinable scent that had always meant home and safety to Ellie. They clung to each other, both crying now, as Nicholas quietly withdrew, leaving them alone in their corner of the vast workshop. "I've missed you so much." Ellie choked out against her mother's shoulder. "I know, sweetheart," her mother murmured, stroking Ellie's hair. "I've been watching over you. Every day. Dad too? Right alongside me." Her mother pulled back slightly, framing Ellie's face with her hands. "He wanted to be here tonight, but there are rules. Only one of us could come through. Why you?" "I mean," Ellie stumbled, afraid she'd said something hurtful. Her mother's smile was understanding. "We decided I should come because there are things you need to hear that only a mother can say properly." She brushed a strand of hair from Ellie's face, her touch achingly familiar. "You've been so brave, Ellie. So strong. But you've been carrying guilt you don't deserve." Ellie looked down, tears blurring her vision again. "If I hadn't forgotten to turn off my straightener—" "No," her mother said firmly. "The fire investigators were wrong. It wasn't your straightener, Ellie. It was faulty wiring in the walls, wiring that had been there since before we bought the house. There was nothing anyone could have done. But if I'd woken up sooner, if I'd called for help faster, you did everything right," her mother insisted. "Everything. Dad and I were already gone before you even woke up." "The smoke." She shook her head. "It was quick, honey. We didn't suffer." Relief, profound and devastating, washed through Ellie like a tidal wave. She'd been carrying the weight of blame for so long that she felt almost weightless without it. "We're so proud of you," her mother continued, wiping tears from Ellie's cheeks. "The way you've fought to keep going, even on the darkest days. And what you did for Nicholas." She smiled. "That's the daughter we raised. Compassionate, giving, seeing beyond your own pain to help another." They talked for hours, time having no meaning in that impossible workshop. Ellie told her mother everything, about the different foster homes, about school, about how hard it was to keep going sometimes. Her mother listened, occasionally offering advice, but mostly just being there, present and loving and real. "I can feel it," her mother said eventually, a sad smile crossing her face. "My time is almost up." Panic surged through Ellie. "No, not yet. There's still so much—" "I know," her mother soothed. "But we've been given more than most ever receive. A chance to say the things that matter most." She took Ellie's hands in hers. "You're going to be all right, Ellie. Better than all right. You have such a beautiful life ahead of you." "How can you know that?" "Because I've seen your heart," her mother said simply. "The same heart that gave your only coat to a stranger in need. That heart will lead you to more joy than you can imagine right now." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small, glittering object. "One last gift," she said, pressing it into Ellie's palm. "From both your dad and me?" It was her mother's wedding ring, the one Ellie had thought was lost in the fire. A simple gold band with tiny diamonds forming a star pattern. "I can't take this," Ellie protested. "It should be buried with you." "It was," her mother said with a mysterious smile. "But tonight it found its way back to where it truly belongs." She closed Ellie's fingers around the ring. "Wear it, keep it safe, let it remind you that love never truly ends. It just changes form." A soft chime sounded from somewhere in the workshop. Ellie's mother closed her eyes briefly, then looked at her daughter with infinite tenderness. "It's time," she whispered. "Remember, Ellie, Dad and I will always be with you. Not just in memory, but in all the ways that truly matter." "I don't want to say goodbye again," Ellie said, her voice breaking. "Then don't," her mother replied, pulling her into one last embrace. "Say until we meet again? Because we will, my darling girl. Just not for a very long time, after you've lived a full and beautiful life." They held each other tightly as a soft, golden light began to envelop her mother's form. Ellie could feel her becoming less substantial, like holding on to morning mist. "I love you, Mom," Ellie whispered fiercely. "Tell Dad I love him too. He knows." Her mother's voice came, already sounding distant. "We both do. We always will." And then she was gone, the golden light fading until Ellie stood alone, her mother's ring clutched in her hand, the warmth of that final embrace still lingering on her skin. Nicholas appeared beside her, his presence solid and comforting. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Ellie nodded, surprising herself with the truth of it. The pain was still there, it would always be there, but alongside it now was something new. A peace she hadn't thought possible. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing no words could ever be adequate for the gift he'd given her. He smiled, his eyes twinkling with ancient wisdom. You gave me your coat without thought of reward. This is not payment, Ellie. This is the universe responding in kind. Together they walked back through the magical workshop, through the toy store now illuminated only by moonlight streaming through the windows. Outside, snow was falling in thick, lazy flakes, transforming the world into something new and clean and full of possibility. Will I see you again? Ellie asked as they stood in the doorway. Nicholas considered this, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Perhaps, though not in the same way. He reached out, gently touching her cheek. But I'll be watching. We all will. I still have so many questions, Ellie admitted. The best questions rarely have simple answers, Nicholas replied with a wink. But I think you'll find, as you continue your journey, that the answers reveal themselves in time. He handed her a small box, one last gift, wrapped in silver paper with a blue ribbon. Don't open this until tomorrow morning, he instructed. And Ellie, remember that sometimes the greatest gifts we receive are the opportunities to give. With those words, he gently guided her out into the snowy night, the door closing softly behind her. Ellie stood for a moment, snowflakes catching in her eyelashes, her mother's ring warm in her palm, the mysterious package tucked safely in her coat pocket. Above her, the clouds had parted just enough to reveal a scatter of stars, and brightest of all, a single star that seemed to pulse with a light all its own. As she began the walk back to Mrs. Henley's house, Ellie felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope, not just for tomorrow or for Christmas, but for all the days that would follow. Days that would still hold grief and challenges, certainly, but also wonder, connection, and the quiet certainty that she was never truly alone. Christmas morning dawned clear and brilliant, sunlight turning the fresh snow into a carpet of diamonds. Ellie woke early, her mother's ring hanging on a chain around her neck, the small silver package from Nicholas still unopened on her nightstand. With careful fingers, she unwrapped it, lifting the lid on yet another exquisitely carved wooden box. Inside lay a snow globe even more beautiful than the first. But this one didn't show her past, her childhood home, her life before the fire. This globe contained a scene she didn't recognize, a cozy cottage surrounded by pine trees, with a frozen pond nearby perfect for skating. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and tiny figures could be seen through the windows, a family gathering around a table. Beneath the globe was a small golden key attached to a card with an address written in Nicholas's distinctive handwriting, and below that, 4 simple words that made Ellie's heart skip. For your new beginning. Ellie stared at the key, at the snow globe, at the address she didn't recognize. Understanding dawned slowly, like the Christmas sun climbing above the horizon. Some gifts couldn't be left beside a bed. Some gifts were too large, too life-changing. Ellie? Mrs. Henley's voice called from downstairs. Are you awake? There's someone here to see you. Clutching the key, Ellie made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Henley standing in the living room with a tall man in a business suit. Merry Christmas, Ellie. Mrs. Henley said, smiling more broadly than Ellie had ever seen. This is Mr. Peterson from the State Guardian ad litem office. He has some rather extraordinary news. Mr. Peterson stepped forward, extending his hand. Miss James, I'm here about your parents' estate. It seems there was an insurance policy we weren't aware of until yesterday. Quite a substantial one, in fact. Ellie's mind spun. Insurance? But all the paperwork after the fire said, yes, well, that's the strange thing. Mr. Peterson continued, looking slightly bewildered himself. The documentation just appeared in our system yesterday. Verified and authenticated, but somehow overlooked until now. He handed her a thick envelope. All the details are in here, but the short version is that you're now the beneficiary of a trust that will more than cover your education and living expenses until you turn 25, at which point the remaining balance transfers fully to your control. There's more, Mrs. Henley added, her eyes shining with tears. The trust includes a property, a cottage just outside town. According to Mr. Peterson, it was purchased by your parents as an investment shortly before the accident, but the paperwork was misplaced until now. Ellie's fingers tightened around the golden key in her pocket. She knew without checking that the address would match the one on the card from Nicholas. The really remarkable thing, Mr. Peterson said, shuffling through his papers, is that everything was finalized late last night? On Christmas Eve of all times? I've never known government offices to process anything that quickly, especially during the holidays. A cottage with a frozen pond nearby. A new beginning. Outside the window, Ellie caught a flash of red, a cardinal perhaps, or a reflection of Christmas decorations in the snow. But she knew better. "Thank you," she said, accepting the envelope from Mr. Peterson, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "This is more than I ever expected." Later that day, after the paperwork was explained and Mr. Peterson had left with promises of additional support in the coming weeks, Mrs. Henley drove Ellie to see the cottage. It was exactly as the snow globe had depicted, a charming two-bedroom home nestled among pine trees with a small frozen pond visible through the back windows. The interior was simple but warm, already furnished with pieces that somehow reminded Ellie of her childhood home without being exact replicas. On the mantelpiece was a framed photograph she'd never seen before, her parents on their wedding day, laughing as they fed each other cake, their faces radiant with joy and promise. "How is this possible?" Mrs. Henley whispered, as confused by the miraculous turn of events as Ellie pretended to be. "Sometimes wonderful things just happen," Ellie replied, thinking of an old man shivering in the snow, of her mother's embrace in an impossible workshop, of Nicholas's parting words. "Sometimes the greatest gifts we receive are the opportunities to give." As if in response to her thoughts, Ellie noticed a small envelope propped against the photograph. Inside was a list of names, children in the foster system, all without permanent homes, all with stories of loss similar to Ellie's own. At the bottom of the list, Nicholas had written, "They need what you needed, someone who understands. The cottage has room for visitors. The choice, as always, is yours." Ellie tucked the list carefully into her pocket, next to the key that had unlocked this new chapter of her life. She thought of her coat, given freely on a freezing night to a stranger in need. She thought of her mother's words, "That heart will lead you to more joy than you can imagine right now." Outside the cottage window, snow began to fall again, gentle, perfect flakes drifting down from a brightening sky. In the distance, Ellie could have sworn she heard the faint jingling of bells. She smiled, touching the ring that hung around her neck. Some stories end with a return to the ordinary world, forever changed by extraordinary events. But for Ellie, this wasn't an ending at all. It was, at long last, a beginning.